Late autumn's dawn cast a veil of mist over the valley surrounding Koblenz, where the Rothman family castle mirrored itself in the winding Rhine River. From the marble-tiled dining room, Henrik Rothman could see the freshly pruned rose garden and the Greek statues bathed in dew light. But this morning, his eyes were fixed on the plate before him. A serving of spaghetti à la vongole, just placed on the table. The clam shells were artfully arranged in a circle, golden pasta strands glazed in a white wine sauce. Perfect by every culinary standard, except for the lingering sense of absence that Henrik could not name. He frowned, inhaled gently. The garlic, the tang of wine, the trace of unsalted butter were all present. So what was missing? Henrik's fingers tapped lightly on the oak table. The crisp sound made Lucas, the French head chef standing a few meters away, freeze mid-gesture. Lucas! Henrik's voice was low and precise, like a Swiss timepiece. Was the inventory checked last night? Yes, sir. The stock list is still in perfect order. Lucas answered in crisp German, though a slight twitch tugged at his jaw. Perfect? In the past 3 days, the number of ferrochelate tablets I use for my morning iron regimen has dropped by 6. That's exactly 2 bottles. And 10 bags of type 00 pasta are also missing. Lucas swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his temple, though the room temperature held steady at 21 degrees Celsius. Possibly a data input error, sir. Henrik raised a single finger, cutting him off with the same terse gesture he used in boardrooms. Don't insult me. Nothing in this house goes missing by accident. Rising from his chair, the folds of his plum-colored Italian silk robe fell neatly along his tall, lean frame. The room grew colder. Before Lucas could step back, Henrik had already crossed the corridor lined with Persian rugs, striding toward the food cellar. The corridor opened into the cold storage area, gleaming with stainless steel. Henrik halted before a wooden oval shelf holding the supplement cabinet. The lead seal was intact, but a man who once oversaw 30 transcontinental freight lines knew the truth. Seals lie, numbers don't. He pulled out a leather-bound notebook and scribbled, YAML, Sawcheption SUA, ferrochelate, minus 12 tablets, 2 bottles missing. Pasta 00 minus 10 kilograms. Small numbers, perhaps, but to Henrik they were a crack. Empires collapse not from earthquakes, but from fissures. Returning to the kitchen, he encountered Sophia Moretti, the housekeeper and internal affairs assistant, polishing the onyx counter. Her movements were fluid, precise, almost invisible. In 6 years, Sophia had never been late, never taken a day off. She bowed her head in greeting, hand never missing a beat. Mrs. Moretti, the basement hallway cameras. Are there recordings stored on the internal server? Henrik asked, eyes fixed on the spotless cloth. Yes, sir. The footage auto-deletes after 30 days, Sophia replied, her voice soft yet clear. Henrik gave a slight nod and walked away, expression unreadable. Sophia watched his back briefly. Her gaze flickered with something indecipherable before returning to her task. Security Control Room 910. Henrik stood behind Security Chief Hoffman, hands in his robe pockets, eyes scanning the bank of monitors. LED light glinted off the bridge of his nose, sharpening his features. Which segment do you want? Hoffman asked. Fast forward the main kitchen, pasta storage door, supplement cabinet. All footage from 22 to 6 o'clock for the last 30 days. Hoffman hesitated. The request was stringent, but Rothman was the undisputed king of this castle. He complied. Grainy footage zipped by, staff moving about, forklifts transporting crates, Lucas checking the freezer. No sign of theft. Suddenly, Henrik raised a hand. Stop at 4:16, October 14th. The frame zoomed in. Sophia, dressed in a deep blue uniform, exiting the cellar with a beige canvas bag over her shoulder. She wasn't sneaky. She swiped her access card by the book. But what had she done before that? No other camera angle revealed it. Henrik crossed his arms, thoughtful. A model employee, so frugal she refused New Year's gifts, suddenly leaving the cellar at dawn with a canvas bag. 2 bottles of iron supplements and 10 kilos of pasta weren't worth more than a sliver of her salary. The motive wasn't money. "Export the raw footage for me," Henrik ordered. "Don't tell anyone. Not even Mrs. Moretti." Hoffman nodded. Moments later, a USB drive rested in Henrik's coat pocket. Main office, 10:30. Autumn sunlight streamed through the arched glass window, illuminating the walnut shelves lined with German trade medals and an honorary degree from the University of St. Gallen. Henrik sank into his leather chair, plugged in the USB, and replayed the video again and again. Each time Sophia bowed her head through the frame, his heartbeat thumped louder. It wasn't anger, it was unease. The sense that an invisible cog in his perfect system was spinning off-center, threatening to derail the whole mechanism. The laptop chimed, low battery. Henrik snapped back to reality. The wall clock struck 3. It was past time for the weekly board Zoom call. He closed the shutter, buttoned his cuffs, and assumed the calm presence of a composed chairman. But as the faces of regional directors filled the screen, Henrik realized he couldn't hear the EBITDA report. The numbers were still impressive, but his mind was stuck on a beige bag quietly vanishing from the cellar. After the meeting ended, Henrik switched off his webcam, removed his glasses, and leaned back. Outside the window, the first maple leaves floated down to the estate's pond, spinning gently in the breeze. Beautiful, but nature's order was still one of inevitable decay. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out, not Cuban cigars or cognac as in years past, but a faded gray hoodie, a birthday gift from his late wife. Fingers brushing the worn hem, Henrik let out a wry chuckle. A billionaire in a hoodie, out on the street, over 10 kilos of pasta. But even a hairline crack could be the start of collapse. And Henrik Rothman would allow nothing, and no one, to break his order, not until he understood everything. Outside, the tower clock chimed its final note for noon. Henrik rose, placing the hoodie on the chair back, a sign that the decision was made. Tonight, he would follow the crack to the very end. Dusk in Cologne bathed the facades of Wilhelmine-era houses in gold, light stretching out as if trying to hold onto the last breath of day. Henrik Rothman, dressed in a faded gray hoodie, neatly pressed jeans, and a low-brimmed cap, stepped out of an Uber on Mauritiussteinweg. This wasn't where a man like him usually appeared. His usual boulevards were Berlin's Friedrichstrasse or Milan's Via Monte Napoleon. But tonight he was in hiding. Outside the back gate of the Rothman estate, Sophia Moretti had just finished her shift. Her deep-sea blue uniform was still pristine, a beige canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Henrik sat in the Uber, 2 cars behind, head bowed as if checking his phone. She walked with an upright gait, neither hurried nor hesitant. She didn't look back even once. A woman not running, but not at ease either. That's the rhythm of someone who's survived, Henrik thought. Sophia turned onto Venloer Strasse and descended the stairs at Rudolfplatz station. Henrik paused for a moment, uncertain. He, who once traveled exclusively in an armored Bentley with a dedicated driver, now stood amid torn flyers and the musty smell of underground transit. When was the last time I took a train? He wondered. Maybe 1990 when I was still a student in Leipzig. The train doors slid open. Henrik stepped inside, keeping 3 people's distance behind Sophia. Shoulders bumped, phones rang. The loudspeaker announced stops in German interspersed with Turkish. It felt like slipping into another world, one without climate control, without private space. Sophia didn't glance around. Her gaze rested on the window's reflection, one hand clutching her bag strapped tightly. 17 minutes. The train stopped at Jeffersonstrasse, in the Mulheim district, a place once industrial, now a scar on the city, full of refugees, migrant laborers, the unemployed, and undocumented children. Henrik followed her out, keeping a few meters behind. The scenery shifted at once, from glass towers to yellowing buildings with peeling paint and rusted shutters. Sophia passed an Arab bakery, nodding to the owner arranging stacks of pita bread. An elderly Italian woman waved from a second-floor balcony. Buonasera, Sophia. A brown-skinned boy of about 10 slipped an apple into her hand. Sophia smiled gently. Henrik froze for a second. In this place he had imagined to be the city's underbelly, she was not invisible. Quite the opposite, she belonged here. The building she entered was a worn 5-story block of concrete, its facade moss-stained and tangled with electric cables like a spider's web. Henrik crossed to the other side of the street, leaning against the shuttered wall of a closed auto repair shop. A young mechanic passed him by without notice. From the 3rd floor, a window creaked open. A little girl with brown pigtails in a red sweater leaned out. "Mama!" "Say in retardo. Mama, you're late." Her high-pitched voice echoed, the only lively sound in a neighborhood that seemed to be collapsing in on itself. Henrik couldn't see her face clearly, but something struck him, her upward tilt, her gaze, even her smile. Something so achingly familiar his heart skipped a beat. The front door closed behind Sophia. Henrik moved to the side of the neighboring building, resting his back against its brick wall. From the 3rd floor window, now lit, came faint sounds. Not loud, not clear, but just enough to reveal what he had never considered. A child's voice. "Mama, is it time for medicine?" Sophia's voice replied, soft as silk, but with a crack Henrik heard deep in her throat. "Almost sweetheart. We have to stretch every pill this week." A rasping cough followed. Not the girl's, but a young male's, frail and strained. Henrik shut his eyes. The man who had held steady through million-euro negotiations now felt like he'd taken a punch from nowhere. No theft, no betrayal, no deceit, only a mother, 2 children, and brutal scarcity. He looked up again. Paper snowflakes were taped around the window's edges. In the warm yellow light, Sophia bent to set the table. The girl dashed in to hug her from behind. A thin boy, wrapped in a blanket, sat on the couch, coughing and smiling faintly. Henrik turned away. It felt as though someone had set a stone on his chest. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel in control. He felt small. Back at the castle, Lucas was preparing duck breast in orange sauce. Henrik didn't eat. He passed the dining room without a word. In the auxiliary kitchen, he saw Sophia polishing crystal glasses, movements as precise as ever. But today, Henrik saw her hands tremble just slightly. No one in the multimillion-euro mansion knew that tonight, their master had returned from the other side of the bridge, where the order he trusted had unraveled in the face of a pack of pasta, a strip of pills, and a child's smile. Henrik stood silently, watching Sophia. For the first time, he didn't see a servant. He saw a mother, a survivor. Morning light poured through the tall windows of the auxiliary kitchen, casting a pale winter hue across the soft gray tiles. The space, designed like a culinary laboratory, German ovens, Japanese knives, spice racks arranged by color code, was quiet. At the head of the long walnut dining table, Henrik Rothman sat motionless, his hand resting beside a cup of black coffee. The coffee had cooled slightly, but he hadn't taken a sip. His gaze lingered on the croissant on his plate, its golden, butter-glossed layers perfectly crisp as always. Yet in Henrik's mind, nothing about this morning felt perfect. Sophia's footsteps echoed softly, nearly in sync with the antique clock's steady ticking. She appeared precisely on time, as she did every morning. Deep blue uniform crisply ironed, hair tightly coiled without a strand out of place, apron white as if freshly pressed. In her hands, a silver tray held a plate of pre-cut fruit and the iron supplement Henrik took each morning after breakfast. She placed the tray down and refilled his glass with fresh orange juice, her movements seamless and unhesitant. This was the practiced rhythm of someone who had repeated this process almost daily for 6 years. Every step, every beat, as precise as the second hand on the Swiss watch Henrik wore. He said nothing for a few moments, but then, as if something inside him had finally reached its mark, a voice, a memory, a night crouched behind a damp brick wall in a slum, Henrik spoke. "Did you sleep well last night, Sophia?" His voice wasn't loud, nor sharp, but in the quiet, orderly kitchen, it rang like an off-key bell. Sophia paused for just a fraction of a second. A blink. Enough for Henrik to catch the flicker of surprise in her usually unreadable brown eyes. She didn't lift her head entirely, but her eyes glanced across his face. Then, quickly, she returned to her task, setting the orange juice pitcher back in its exact place. "I'm well, sir," she said. The sound was smooth, properly polite, neither warm nor cold. But what unsettled Henrik most wasn't her voice. It was the complete absence of emotion in it. The answer sounded pre-programmed, like everything else in this house. Clean, functional, and invisible. Henrik didn't respond. He picked up a silver spoon and stirred his cold coffee. 1 circle. 2. The aroma rose faintly, but it wasn't strong enough to mask the bitterness spreading in his mouth. A bitterness not from the coffee, but from something closer to regret. For 6 years, he had lived under the same roof with Sophia. 6 years of her punctuality, her silence, her uncomplaining efficiency. And in all that time, he had never asked a question like this. He had never truly seen her, until last night, standing in shadow, watching her return to a world he hadn't believed was real. Sophia turned and left to prepare the tray for the East Wing conference room. Henrik watched her back and wondered, how long has it been since anyone asked her if she was okay? And how much longer would it take him to ask what truly mattered? That entire day passed with Henrik present in online meetings, but mentally adrift. He listened to regional directors' report on Q4 revenue, post-Brexit logistics, fluctuating oil prices. Every word that reached his ears turned to white noise. He couldn't stop thinking about Stella's face at the window, Leo's rasping cough, or the way Sophia had said, "We have to stretch each pill this week." After lunch, he wandered into the back garden, walking between rows of perfectly trimmed topiary. Autumn leaves fell quietly at his feet, as if reminding him that all things must wither before they are reborn. From a distance, he spotted Sophia cleaning the glass panels of the greenhouse. She bent carefully, polishing each streak with a white cloth. Her movements were steady and strong. But today, to Henrik, she was no longer just part of the scenery. She was a woman fighting in silence, a mother balancing work, medication, and 2 growing children amid scarcity. Henrik returned to his study. Sitting at his antique desk, he took out his personal phone, hesitated for a beat, then typed, "I need a copy of Sophia Moretti's personnel file. Both times. Everything that still exists. Not through the system." He sent it to Leona Wenzel, the retired head of HR, a woman who remembered more than any database. 10 minutes later, Leona called back. "Henrik." Her voice was still easy to recognize. "You're looking into Sophia again? I thought she left permanently in 2015. She was rehired in 2017. There's a gap," he said slowly. Leona paused. "I remember something. She left without stating a reason. We didn't document it as per request." Her voice dropped. "I also recall something else. Your wife was away on extended business travel back then, wasn't she?" Henrik clenched the pen in his hand. "Yes. Someone filed an internal complaint against her. It was never investigated. Your former assistant, Mr. Steinman, handled it privately." Henrik ended the call, a chill creeping down his spine. The past was returning, not with a roar, but with a whisper. Stories he had buried for 8 years now rising like bubbles in a wine glass. That afternoon, he sat and stared at the old gray hoodie draped over the back of the sofa, the item he hadn't touched since his wife's death. He didn't know why he'd kept it, but tonight he would wear it. Not to accuse, not to command, but to search for what had truly been lost. Something that might have been his, if only he had seen it sooner. The train was about to leave the station, and this time he would not remain in the castle. Floor 32, Rothman Logistics Headquarters, Frankfurt. A glass and steel complex where everything gleamed, flattened, and left no room for shadows. But that morning, when Gideon Voss walked into the boardroom in a sharp gray suit and carrying a crocodile leather briefcase, he brought with him the one thing that couldn't be reflected in glass, the scent of ambition. Gideon, 52, CFO of the conglomerate, had been personally recruited by Henrik Rothman for his scalpel-sharp ability to cut costs. But Gideon was not loyal. He didn't build empires. He waited to seize them. It began with Henrik's growing absences. This was the 3rd week in a row the chairman hadn't been in the office, sending only vague, fragmented notes. Gideon tapped the projector. The screen lit up with charts, ROI falling, unverified investments rising, most of it flowing into a Mulheim community center. We could call this a humanitarian expense, Gideon told the two board members before him. But what will the council see? A 62-year-old man, neglecting his company, suddenly pouring money into a library for poor children. One regional CFO spoke up. You think Rothman has a personal reason? Gideon smirked, voice sharp as a scalpel. Personal reasons are the cracks in empires. He had dug deep enough. Sophia Moretti, terminated during the mysterious absence of Mrs. Rothman in 2015. Suspicious timing. And now, Henrik was funding the center where she volunteered, visiting weekly, vanishing from the boardroom. It reeked of buried history. That afternoon, Elise Rothman, Henrik's niece and current COO, received a call from Gideon. We need to talk, he said flatly, about your uncle and what you're about to inherit. They met at the cafe in the lobby of Rothman Tower. Elise arrived on time, wearing a sand-colored blazer, her expression sharp. Born into a family of 3 generations of executives, she had learned Henrik's first rule of leadership early. Control emotion like you control cost. Tightly. Skip the coffee, she said. What do you want? Gideon leaned forward. A board vote next month. To remove Henrik. I'll take his place. If you want to remain COO, support me. My uncle hasn't resigned, she replied. But he's withdrawn, Gideon said quickly. No meetings, no operations, no financial oversight. Worse, he's funding a slum charity, where, by sheer coincidence, the woman involved in a 2015 scandal now volunteers. Elise paused. She had heard whispers of Henrik frequenting Mulheim. She'd assumed it was grief post-bereavement. But if Gideon was right, do you have proof? Gideon slid a dossier across the table. Surveillance photos of Henrik leaving HQ, personal donation records, volunteer staff lists, Sophia Moretti's name circled in red. You understand now? Gideon said, almost paternal. This company can't stand on an unresolved affair. Elise picked up the file, her hand tightening slightly. As a child, her mother had once searched for Henrik in vain after a family crisis. He'd disappeared then, too. She thought she had forgiven him. But now, another woman, another child, was entangled with the Rothman name. Just don't vote against me, Gideon whispered. I'll ensure you become the next CEO. Henrik can retire with dignity. If not, this hits the press and the Rothman name won't be about logistics anymore. It'll be scandal. Elise took a long sip of espresso. Her gaze darkened, not with anger, but with something far harder than power. Loyalty to someone who once vanished when she needed him most. Meanwhile, in Mulheim, Henrik sat cross-legged on the floor of the community center. In front of him, a group of children were drawing. White dots for stars, green circles for planets. Mister, is the moon a person? A boy asked. Henrik smiled. Maybe it's someone who listens to everything we say, but never interrupts. 200 kilometers away, a silent coup was being planned. A man was about to be dethroned. Henrik didn't know yet, but soon he would have to face not just the board, but the shadow of the man he used to be. The glass doors of St. Elizabeth Krankenhaus were fogged with morning condensation, blurring the faint yellow light glowing from inside. Henrik Rothman sat silently beside a metal hospital bed, where Leo, thin, pale-skinned, and newly out of a 7-hour heart surgery, slept in a medicated haze. The room was quiet, save for the soft beep of the heart monitor and the gentle hum of the ventilation fan. The metal chair beneath Henrik was painfully hard, but he didn't complain. He didn't leave either. On the other side of the bed, Sophia Moretti had dozed off, her head tilted toward the wall, one hand still loosely holding the packet of medication just handed over by the doctor. Her eyes were slightly swollen, but her lips remained pressed together, alert even in exhaustion. On a chair by the window, Stella, Sophia's young daughter, sat drawing with colored pencils on the back of a cereal box. Her brown hair was loosely braided, a bit messy. Her oversized hoodie sagged around her small frame. She made no fuss, asked for nothing. She just kept drawing, as if stopping would cause the whole world to fall apart. Henrik stood and walked over quietly. "What are you drawing?" he asked, voice as soft as he could manage. Stella didn't look up. "A map," she said. "A map to where?" "Home." Henrik stopped. The answer struck him like a quiet punch to the chest. He leaned in slightly, catching a glimpse of her paper. Planets, stars, orange lines connecting them in broken paths. In the bottom left corner, written in faint pencil, "If Leo gets lost while he's sleeping, this is the way home." Henrik turned his face away, so she wouldn't see the tears welling in his eyes. A child who didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't need comforting, only drew a map to bring her brother back to life. "Thank you for looking after your brother," he whispered. Stella gave a small nod and continued drawing. When Henrik returned to his seat, he noticed Stella's small backpack had slipped off the chair, its contents spilled. A box of colored pencils, a handkerchief, and a worn, soft-cover notebook with a hand-drawn moon on the front. He bent down to pick up the items and, almost absent-mindedly, opened the notebook. Among the pages of space-themed sketches, a pale blue note was tucked between two drawings, folded in quarters. Henrik hesitated, but curiosity overcame him. He unfolded the note. It was a letter, written in a child's hand, the lines crooked but careful. "Dear Mr. James." Stella didn't yet know his real name was Henrik. Someone must have once told her it was James. "I know you're not my dad, but sometimes I wish you were. My real dad is gone. Mom says so, but I don't remember him. I only see him in dreams. He wears a dark suit and never speaks. He just stands far away and watches me draw. Like you. I don't tell Mom because she gets sad when someone talks about Dad. But if you ever see me and Mom and Leo, I just want to say, please don't go. We don't need someone to save us. We just need someone who stays. Stella Moretti." Henrik read it a second time, then a third. His hands trembled, not because of the words themselves, but because of the feeling of being completely seen by a 7-year-old child. She hadn't begged, hadn't asked to be loved, hadn't called him Dad. But the letter carried a weight Henrik had never borne in his entire life. The longing to be noticed, to be kept, to not be left behind. He sat frozen. Slowly, he folded the paper and gently placed it back in the notebook. His heart, hardened by decades of corporate warfare, now beat to a different rhythm. Not out of pity, but because he saw himself in that letter. Because all his life, Henrik had also been a child hoping someone would stay. Sophia stirred around 9 p.m. as the hospital hallway lights dimmed for the night. She sat up slowly, smoothed her hair, glanced at Henrik, then over to her son, still sleeping peacefully. "Thank you for staying," she said softly, voice raspy. Henrik didn't respond right away. His hand gripped the armrest, the letter now in his coat pocket, its presence like a crack in the illusion of control he had spent decades constructing. "Sophia," he said, not looking at her, "there's something I need to ask. But I won't, unless you're ready." Sophia looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "I knew one day you would." "Stella, did you ever think I should know?" No anger, no dramatics, just silence, long and deep, like she was weighing every cell of her being before answering. "There was a time," she whispered, "but then I realized you never really looked at anyone. When I left the house that year, you didn't ask why. You just signed the papers." Henrik remembered. His wife had been on a 3-week business trip. He had come home late, crossed paths with Sophia in the kitchen a few nights. Long nights. A glance. A single touch. Then an email resigning. He hadn't asked. He hadn't stopped her. Sophia turned to the hospital window. "I don't need you to make it right. I just need someone my daughter can believe. We'll read a letter to the very last line." Henrik looked at her, and suddenly he understood. It wasn't about whether he was Stella's biological father. It was about whether he deserved to be the person she chose. That night, Henrik left the hospital late. The letter remained in his breast pocket, not as proof, but as a reminder. Some questions don't need answers. They only need someone brave enough to stay. The third-floor corridor of St. Elizabeth Hospital was silent as paper. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh, cold white over the tiled floor. Only the occasional footsteps of a nurse echoed softly, like a ticking second hand dragging time across sterile ceramic squares. Henrik Rothman leaned against the white wall beside the patient room door. His hands were in his coat pockets, but his palms were clenched into fists. In one of those pockets was Stella's letter, creased and worn from being opened, read, folded, and unfolded all afternoon. He had read it enough to memorize it, but not enough to know what to do next. Inside the room, Leo was sleeping. Stella had been led away by a nurse to the hospital's children's rest area. Sophia had just returned, having changed out of the blood-stained sweater she wore during her son's surgery. She wore no makeup, no scent, only the heavy shadows beneath her brown eyes, carved from sleepless nights and silent burdens. They faced each other across 2 rows of white floor tiles, like 2 people walking opposite directions, yet neither stepping aside. Henrik spoke first, his voice low, no longer cold. "I read her letter." Sophia looked at him, no denial, no evasion. "I knew you would." Henrik nodded slightly. "I used to have everything. A home, a car, a company, a wife, honor. But today, all I see is a man who lost the most precious thing, the chance to be present." She said nothing. "I'm not asking to claim anything. I'm asking because I need to know. Do I have the right to stay? Not as Henrik Rothman, the chairman, but as the man Stella is waiting for." Something flickered in Sophia's gaze. Henrik continued, "I don't know if I'm her biological father. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. But one thing I do know, I want to stay. I'm not here to promise anything. I just want to be the person your daughter can come home to after school and say, 'Today I drew a new planet, and I will listen.'" The air between them thickened like cold mist. After a long pause, Sophia spoke, her voice hoarse. "You don't understand, Henrik. When I found out I was pregnant, I wrote you a letter. 3, actually, but I never sent them, because I knew they wouldn't reach you. They'd go to your secretary, then your lawyer, and finally be shredded by the system you built, to keep everything at a safe distance." Henrik didn't argue, because he knew it was true. He had built a fortress around himself, so perfect that no one could get in, and no one mattered enough for him to step out. "I cleaned up after your drunken nights when you fought with your wife. I wrapped Christmas presents for her, laundered your shirts, brewed your coffee to the exact temperature you liked. And when I left, you never asked why. You just signed the resignation papers and replaced me with another housekeeper. That's when I realized I was just a loose screw, discarded when I no longer fit." Henrik swallowed hard. Something inside him cracked, quietly. "I never thought I'd say these things," Sophia went on. "But Stella isn't like me. She's a child who won't accept silence as an answer. She draws so she'll be seen. She writes letters because she believes someone will read them. You can't just stand outside a hospital room and think you've become a father. Being a father it's sitting by a bed through a fevered night. It's saying, 'It's going to be okay,' for the 200th time, while breaking inside." Henrik looked her in the eye. "I'll say it. 200 times or 2,000. Silence. Sophia exhaled slowly. "I don't need you to make it up. Stella doesn't lack food, or books, or dresses. She lacks someone who stays. If you're here to seek redemption, I suggest you leave. But if you're here to become who she needs, then don't ask me for permission." Henrik nodded just once. Small, steady, like a vow that needed no words. Sophia turned. Just before opening the hospital room door, she said quietly, without turning back, "Tomorrow, Leo wakes up. You could be the first person he sees, if you're not late." The door closed behind her. Henrik stood still, eyes shut. For the first time in his life, he didn't win anything. But he had touched something he never believed was meant for men like him: trust. That night, Henrik returned to the Rothman estate. Not by car, but by train. On the ride, he pulled a blank sheet of paper from his coat and scribbled, "Stella, if the moon is the one who listens, then the sun is the one who stays, even when no one asks it to. I will stay, not to replace anyone, but so you can draw another planet. And I'll listen to every tiny detail. Henrik. He folded the letter and placed it back in his pocket. Tomorrow he would give it to her. Not to earn her love, but to humbly ask for a place in her world. Patiently, and with permanence. The Rothman Logistics building in Frankfurt gleamed like a crystal shard embedded in a forest of steel and glass. On this Monday morning, the 33rd floor, home to the strategic boardroom, was filled with the company's most powerful figures. Their suits were immaculate, ties pulled tight, and their thin smiles masked intentions that would never be written into any official minutes. Gideon Voss, chief financial officer, sat at the head of the left side of the table. Today he wore a bespoke charcoal suit from Savile Row, perfectly measured, like every plan he had ever crafted. Chairman Rothman will not be joining us today, Gideon announced, his voice deep and clear. We'll proceed as scheduled, with the motion for a vote of no confidence. No one was surprised. In recent weeks, Henrik had been consistently absent. He hadn't responded to strategic emails, hadn't approved the quarterly budgets, and most notably, had missed the critical valuation session for the Swedish acquisition. A deal worth nearly 600 million euros. Elise Rothman, Henrik's niece and current COO, sat silently on the right side of the table, her eyes fixed on the document case before her. Inside it was a copy of a file, leaked from Gideon's private investigation, regarding a personal relationship between Henrik and a former employee, Sofia Moretti. Gideon tapped the control panel. The screen behind him displayed two charts. A 3% drop in ROI for the previous quarter. A breakdown of Henrik Rothman's personal expenditures, highlighting anonymous donations to a community center in Mulheim. I'm not making accusations, Gideon said with a half smile. But I pose this question. When the founder pulls away from operations and channels money into a vague project, is that charity or a sign of decline? No one replied. The silence sounded a lot like consent. At that very moment, Henrik Rothman stood outside Kita Morgenstern Elementary School in Cologne. His gray wool coat was lightly dusted with flour. In one hand he held a tin of chestnut cookies. In the other a folded letter. School had just ended. Stella emerged from the gate, a planet-shaped backpack bouncing behind her, her twin braids a little frayed. She stopped short when she saw him, then stepped forward. Henrik offered her the tin. These are chestnut cookies. My aunt once skipped school just to steal one. Stella squinted at him. You skipped school too? Henrik nodded. Once, but I got caught. My grandmother banned cookies for a whole month. Stella laughed. For the first time, Henrik saw that her smile was no longer tentative. It opened like a window in a dark room, and for a fleeting moment, he felt as if he were standing inside it. He handed her the letter. You can read this later, but if you don't like it, you can tear it up. I won't be upset. Stella nodded. I'll read it. I don't like unfinished stories. That same afternoon, Henrik received the news. The board had voted unanimously. An emergency session would convene to discuss transferring the honorary chairmanship and operational control to an interim committee, led by Gideon. Henrik wasn't surprised. He had expected this. The price of stepping off the track he had laid down decades ago was losing control. He stood by the window of the Cologne office, a modest branch he'd visited more often since his wife passed. Evening sunlight stretched across his hands, no longer ink-stained from contracts, but scented faintly of disinfectant and freshly baked cookies. He picked up his phone and dialed Elise. Will you vote against me? He asked plainly. There was a pause on the other end. Then she said, I'm not voting against you, but I'm not voting against the board either. I'm staying still, because you did that once with me, and with all of us. Henrik didn't argue. He had no right to, no reason left to fight for control. I understand. Thank you for being honest. What are you doing right now? Elise asked, her voice unexpectedly soft. Henrik looked out the window. A group of children rode their bikes past. The low winter sun cast golden light across the sidewalk. I'm learning, he said. How to sit beside a child, instead of on top of an empire. Elise didn't reply, but for the first time she hung up without sighing. That evening, Henrik received a message from the doctor. Leo had opened his eyes. His heartbeat was steady. He was stable. Henrik didn't attend the rebuttal meeting with the board. He went to the hospital. He sat beside Sophia and Stella, as Leo blinked slowly, then turned his head. "Who are you?" the boy asked. Henrik gently took his hand. He didn't say who he was. He simply answered, "I'm someone who's here to listen to everything you want to tell me, even the parts that don't have words yet." 33 RD Floor Boardroom. Rothman Logistics. Official Q3 meeting. Day 3. Crystal chandeliers shone onto a 14-meter ebony table where 12 board members sat bolt upright, ties cinched tight, faces pressed smooth by decades in the marketplace. At the head of the table, Henrik Rothman's chair stood empty. Gideon Voss could barely hide his confidence. In front of him lay a pre-drafted minute noting the transfer of the executive chairman's seat to an interim committee, with himself at the helm. Internal soundings showed 10 of the 12 directors ready to press the restructure button. "No one needs to betray Henrik," Gideon said in a warm baritone. "He's a legend. But legends age, and a company can't be run on sentiment." No one objected. Without Henrik, there was no shadow large enough to force second thoughts. Gideon raised a hand. "Let's proceed to the vote." Just then, the door opened. Henrik Rothman walked in, no rush, no apology. His old navy suit showed its years. Silver streaked clearly through his hair. His stride was slow but steady. In his hand hung a creased beige canvas bag identical to the one Sophia carried each day. Every eye fixed on him. Henrik did not excuse his lateness. He merely stood behind his chair. "I haven't come to stop the vote," he said. "I've come to cast a ballot of my own." The air seemed vacuum-sealed. Gideon's lip curled. He signaled the clerk to pause the electronic tally. Henrik opened the bag. He pulled out a folder. Not finances, not a restructuring plan, but hospital records and a handwritten bundle from the Mulheim Community Center. Signed by 126 children, 12 teachers, and Stella. "Here is the return on the investment I chose. A profit you can't price in euros, can't distribute as dividends. Yet it is why I stand here today as a human being." Gideon cut in, voice stripped to pure logic. "Henrik, this is a corporation, not a children's home. You built it on discipline and ROI, not feeling." Henrik nodded. "True, I built it on control. But I forgot. Any durable system is held together by the people who believe in it, not by the numbers." His gaze swept the table. "I'm not asking to keep the chair. Strike my name off the front gate if you must. I want only one thing, to cast a vote, not as chairman, but as founder." Elise spoke for the first time. "What is that vote?" Henrik smiled and produced a tiny sheet. The scanned letter from Stella, signed Stella Moretti. "My vote is this. Keep something immeasurable, so the empire doesn't become just a machine." Silence. No laptops clicked, no phones stirred. Then, unexpectedly, Elise rose. "When I was little and my mother died, no one in the family sat with me. But that night, Henrik, the man everyone calls a machine, stood by my bed, said nothing, and held my hand until morning. If a company has no place for a person like that, we'd better ask what we are building." The ballot results stayed private. Only this was certain. The restructure stalled. Gideon withdrew. Elise became the incoming CEO. Henrik formally resigned, yet kept the title honorary chairman, with one annual veto. That year he used it to block a single motion. Do not cut funding for the Mulheim Community Center. That evening Henrik sat in the castle's conservatory opposite Stella, who spooned vanilla ice cream, eyes bright as stars. "Did you win?" she asked. "No," Henrik chuckled. "But nobody else won either, so it's all right. Then, where are we going tomorrow?" Henrik looked up through the glass dome where the first stars had appeared. "Tomorrow we'll go draw another planet." Morning at Rothman Castle was strangely quiet. No secretary's heels, no rustle of agendas, no intercom chimes. Only gentle sunlight washing the marble floors gold. Upstairs in the bathroom, Henrik stood alone before the mirror. The man in the glass no longer resembled the one who once graced European finance covers. More silver hair, deeper lines, shadows from hospital nights. Armani suit replaced by a pale gray crew neck. The Rolex lay on a shelf, time no longer urgent. He touched the mirror, not to straighten his collar, but to see whether the reflection was still him. When you're no longer chairman, no longer driving a Bentley, no longer signing multimillion checks, what are you? No answer. The mirror merely reflected. For the first time, Henrik accepted that silence. Downstairs, Stella was drawing in the greenhouse. Planets as little rooms. Beds, books, a moon-shaped pillow. In one planet she sketched a big chair. On it sat a man. No crown, no cloak, holding a cup of tea, with 2 children and a smiling woman beside him. In the corner she wrote, "Planet stay." Henrik descended. Sophia was wiping the glass table, wearing a plain white blouse and slacks, no longer a uniform. "This morning," he said. "I have no meetings." "Good," Sophia replied. "I need a hand moving books to the main library. May I come?" "The bus leaves at 9. She walked on, yet her steps were lighter. On the bus Henrik sat with Stella, who slipped an earbud into his ear. "Listen to this. I made it on my laptop. I call it Orbit, because when we're close enough to someone, we circle them, without getting swallowed." Piano notes drifted slow, suspended. Henrik closed his eyes. He felt weightless. No map, no pressure, no reports, just a man relearning how to exist beside others. That afternoon, in a small room at the center, Henrik read to Leo. The book lacked its final page. "What happens next?" Leo asked. Henrik smiled. "What do you think the hero does?" Leo frowned. "He goes back. Not to win, but to fix what he broke. Not by magic, but by his own hands." Henrik laughed softly. "Sounds like a story worth finishing." "If you've got time," Leo said. "Maybe you can write the ending." "I've got time," Henrik replied. For the first time in his career, Henrik had time willingly empty. That night, standing once more before the mirror, he no longer asked who he was. The man reflected back was no longer founder, CEO, magazine icon. He was a father, a listener, the one who stayed. And for the first time, Henrik Rothman saw himself, without titles, without anyone else's shadow.